Defense
à la
is
tragédie.
moving from crisis to
The
tragedy.
scandal has put on display a culture that insulates its bad actors and demands silence of its victims. This is not a new problem, nor is it limited solely to sexual misconduct. It applies to all forms of discriminatory behavior and misconduct where there is a power imbalance and fear of reprisal. The current situation is at stark odds with our nation's expectations of its military and with how I believe the vast majority of military members want to serve. The collective actions, or in some cases, the inaction of senior political, military, and civilian leadership within the government have eroded trust within the defense community. The internal mechanisms that were meant to support those who have suffered misconduct have failed to ensure fair outcomes. They are not just broken, they have collapsed entirely under their own weight. Most of these wounds in the system are self-inflicted, with documented meddling of Canadian Armed Forces members and civilian leadership in positions of power in individual cases, resulting in directed and often malicious cases of reprisal. Careers have been ruined. The psychological damage inflicted on individuals is unconscionable. A few weeks ago, the acting Chief of Defence Staff revealed publicly that he is starting to see cracks in the system. The National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman Office is literally the canary in the coal mine. We deal in matters of procedural and administrative unfairness every day. We deal with complainants who have been thoroughly broken by the system. I can tell you that this office, led by my predecessors and now me, have seen these cracks dating back to our creation. In the context of the significant issues related to sexual misconduct that presented themselves as a result of Maclean's articles in 2014, our office was clear in our concerns that we raised to the Minister of National Defence and senior departmental and military leadership on issues pertaining to the apparatus being built to address the issues brought to light by Justice Deschamps. We heard from personnel that it was not going to work. We heard that more of the same, the furtherance of redress mechanism internal to the military chain of command and civilian hierarchy, that reports into the military and civilian chains of command would solve nothing. Those cracks have now deeply grooved chasms, being further ruptured by the confounding actions and risk aversion of decision makers. National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces leadership must take this wake-up call seriously. Their response can no longer be another checklist exercise. They must take a hard look at the ingrained culture that has perpetuated these problems and take steps to overhaul their internal redress mechanisms and protocols with the intent to restore the confidence of members and of our nation. The department, led by the Minister, the Acting Chief of Defence Staff, and the Deputy Minister of National Defence, have by their own admission failed to do what is required. However, I believe that the strengthening of our office's mandate is an indispensable part of the solution. Over the past 23 years, time and again, the Office of the National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman has told the Minister of National Defence, the Government of Canada, and the Canadian people that our reporting relationship, which is directly to the Minister, does not work. When leaders turn a blind eye to our recommendations and concerns in order to advance political interests and their own self-preservation or career advancement, it is the members of the defense community that suffer these consequences. Lorsque des dirigeants refusent d'entendre nos recommandations et nos préoccupations,
When leaders turn a blind eye to our recommendations and concerns in order to advance political interests and their own self-preservation or career advancement, it is the members of the defense community that suffer the consequences. It is clear that inaction is rewarded far more than action.
That inaction is rewarded far more than action. In the 4 months since the most recent outbreak of multiple accusations of sexual misconduct, the actions of the Minister of National Defence, senior government, and military officials have bitterly proved this point. The erratic behavior of leadership defies common sense or reason. The concept of ministerial accountability has been absent. Our allies are watching these events unfold in real time. Worse, those who are out to do us harm are also watching. The negative impacts of this crisis on recruitment and retention, and on those directly implicated in these misconduct situations within the Canadian Armed Forces, risk threatening national security. Action must be taken now. Today, I'm releasing my position in a paper that specifically outlines what needs to take place in order to establish true, independent civilian oversight over the department and the military. It contains no recommendations. It represents a list of must-haves that seeks to strengthen the mandate of our Ombudsman's office and finally entrench it in legislation and have it report to Parliament. There's no need for stakeholder or legislative drafters to guess at what it could look like. The paper I am making public today contains draft legislation which gives the Ombudsman full structural and administrative independence from the department so that it can carry out its functions unimpeded. In the event that more talk of review surfaces in response to this press conference and my position paper, I have included in the paper an outline of all the reviews conducted on the subject since 1977. They are numerous and thorough. If taken seriously and acted upon today, I strongly believe that the implementation of this way forward will help restore the trust military members and defense civilians need to have in their workplaces and on the battlefield. If discarded into the ether of political talking points and bureaucratic doublespeak, we will have failed our members in uniform. We will have failed those who have suffered the most under the current system. Those who have been denied fairness, due process, dignity, and respect. And failure will guarantee future victims. À l'heure actuelle, les changements véritables sont très rares.
As of now, there is very little real change on the horizon. A newly appointed internal culture czar and another review by a former Supreme Court justice on how we can best tackle independent oversight of the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. I repeat what I've already said in front of parliamentary committees. Enough is enough. The cycle of scandals, followed by studies, recommendations for independent oversight, half solutions, and resistance by the Department of the Canadian Armed Forces will only be broken when action is taken.
As of now, there's very little real change on the horizon. A newly appointed internal culture czar and another review by a former Supreme Court justice on how we can best tackle independent oversight of the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. I repeat what I already said in front of parliamentary committee. Enough is enough. The cycle of scandals followed by studies, recommendations for independent oversight, half solutions, and resistance by the department or the Canadian Armed Forces will only be broken when action is taken. There must be a shift that rewards the courageous enough to do the right thing. Thank you. I'm now free to take your questions. Merci. Je suis disponible pour prendre vos questions.
I'm open to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lick. We'll now head to the phone lines for questions.
Thank you, merci. Please press *1 at this time to ask a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. First question is from Jacques Galland of the Toronto Star. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Lick. My question for you is something that you mentioned in your position paper. You talked about instances that suggest a pattern of personal and institutional reprisal against your office from the Department of Defense. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, perhaps give some examples of that.
Well, certainly. Certainly, in terms of the people that we are talking about today, the complainants who come to our office, we do hear of reprisal. We do hear of the fear of reprisal of coming forward. So in terms of the people that we're most concerned about today, the people that we represent, we do hear that all the time. In terms of what my office has suffered, and in particular what my predecessor and my predecessors have suffered over the years, we see time and again the interference, though it may be subtle, there is lots of administrative interference in our operations. In fact, just earlier last week, we had people questioning us as to whether we needed to go to the department for approval of questions that we would ask during an investigation. That is a clear example of interference in our operations, and in fact is not allowed even under our mandate. We always try to educate people in this regard. However, it happens time and time and again. Thank you, Jacques.
Thanks. And for my follow-up, you mentioned, for example, the Justice Arbor review that's ongoing. And I know you said in the past that you don't think it's necessary, and you said it again today, for yet another study on setting up external oversight. I'm wondering, are there any aspects of the Arbor review that you think are necessary that could bring about change, or do you think the entire review is unnecessary?
Well, certainly, as part of the review, we have seen Justice Fish as well recommend a review of our office. We see in the mandate of Justice Arbor the request or demand to look at what would be independent external oversight. What I'm saying is enough is enough. We've seen this time and again over 23 years, the need for independent oversight over the military external to the department. That has been clear in the recommendations over the years. Why do we need another review to review a review? I can see the frustration, not only of myself, but of all Canadians, all military members, all veterans. Why do we have to keep doing a review upon a review upon a review? Let's take action. There are certainly aspects of that the department has to work on with respect to culture, with respect to changing the culture so that, and let me be clear on this, it is the people that are courageous who come forward that need to be rewarded, not the people who don't take action. That is what I'm saying, and that culture does need to change within the Canadian Armed Forces and the department.
Next question.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Murray Brewster of CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning, Mr. Ombudsman. My first question for you is, it relates to, you say that there have been examples of where the department has sat on, quote, sensitive information that could be unflattering to the military and to the department. Could you provide us with some examples of that, and are they ongoing?
Well, certainly they are ongoing. In fact, probably the most clear example of that is the most recent one. We provided a report on issues faced by military members, their families, and others as they are posted outside of Canada. There are a number of recommendations in that report, as well as observations and issues that we found. We found in discussions with stakeholders in the department, members of the administration and the military who work on these issues, they received our report very positively. We had to wait 6 months for the minister and the minister's office to respond, just to acknowledge that we had sent them the report in December. It's not even a cogent response to it. That is the type of, while it's not very sensitive information, that is the type of issue that we're trying to address in the legislation that we're putting forward today. A mandated timeline for response to an issue, mandated with a timeline by me. Without that type of power, ministers' offices and others can sit on issues, can sit on recommendations and take no action. That is not acceptable to those that we represent. Thanks, Murray.
And just as a follow-up, you say in your opening statement that when leaders turn a blind eye to our recommendations and concerns to advance political interests in their own self-preservation or career advancement, who are you talking about?
Well, certainly, I think.
Talking about the minister, or were you talking about like senior leadership within the Canadian military?
Well, I think it can be definitely senior leadership in the military, in the department. It could be at leadership at any level. Because what we're seeing across the department in terms of sexual misconduct, in terms of other abuses of authority, and the interference or lack of action by politicians, we're seeing it at committee, we're seeing the filibustering, we're seeing the lack of rather political foot dragging at committees in order to make political points. But we are also seeing these issues across every level of the department. We see it in the complaints that come to us every day. So it is not simply a politician. It is the lack of inaction, the rewarding of inaction, and the lack of reward for the courageous that come forward. That is what we want to change.
Thank you, merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from Lee Bertium of the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. You reference in both your report and your remarks that the military and defense leadership have basically, sounds like, fought tooth and nail against external oversight. On the surface, they've agreed publicly in various situations to the idea, but then fought behind the scenes. Would you say that this is happening now? Is that happening given all of the talk about external oversight following the allegations of sexual misconduct involving senior officers? And what is the role of government in this? To what degree are they responsible for this allowing this fight, turning a blind eye, enabling it? What is the role that you believe they have played in all of that?
Well, certainly on the first part of your question, Lee, yes, I think the current crisis has led vast majority of politicians, the vast majority of people within the department in all levels of our constituency to agree that independent external civilian oversight is necessary. I'm glad. I'm very happy that this is happening because we've talked about it from our office's perspective for the last 23 years. And in fact, it's been talked about, and you'll see in our report, the list of reviews since 1977 that have outlined the need for this. We see allies all have a very similar approach, legislated mandates for their ombudsman and their external oversight. We see this across all of our allies. So I think, yes, I am absolutely glad that this is coming forward. What I'm proposing today and recommending, or rather with must-haves, is that draft legislation which outlines what we need, that gives us permanence, that gives us less interference or administrative interference from the department. It allows us to escalate the issue to appropriate authorities, to the Prime Minister even, and beyond to Parliament, depending on the issue. And it allows us to mandate and demand responses within a timeline recommended by or done by me. That is important to get answers for the people that we represent. In terms of the government, that's a tough one to answer. I can't say one way or the other why politicians do what they do. That's a question for politicians, Lee.
And I'm curious about the timing of this. I mean, obviously, Parliament is rising for the summer. Everyone is expecting an election. Do you have any concerns that basically not only is your call going to kind of be lost, perhaps in the summer in an election, but also even this entire issue and this kind of crisis that is ripping through the military right now, that when things resume in the winter, fall, whatever, that this will have fallen off the radar?
Well, certainly there's always the risk of that, but clearly, let's be clear, my role is to keep it in the public eye. My role is to keep it in front of politicians. My role is to keep it in front of decision makers. That's the job of an ombudsman. We will make sure, as much as we can, as much within my authority, to keep it within the public eye, keep it an issue. That's what our members in the uniform, our employees within the department, families, that's what they deserve. So that's my role. That's what I will do. Yes, the report the position paper that I'm releasing today outlines a part of the solution. It doesn't outline the entire solution. The department has a lot to do to ensure that the culture changes. That's a long-term effort. But Our role would be to ensure that that oversight, to make sure that people are treated fairly by the system. That's the role that we will continue to do, with more teeth added through the legislation to be able to do that. So we will keep it in the public eye. I will make sure of that. I will be as much as I can doing that. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Amanda Connolly of Global News. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking our questions today. So I'm going to follow up on what a couple of my colleagues have raised here. You've raised the specter of political interference in this paper and with your speech, and so I'm hoping you can expand on that. You talked about committee filibustering, political foot dragging, but are you aware of specific cases that, in your view, amount to political interference, not just by military leadership or the department, but actually by the current government in your work? And as part of that, can you expand on what you mean by saying that it can be difficult to avoid, quote, vested political interests during times of crisis or before an election?
Well, certainly I will not speak on specific cases that are brought before us. The principles of ombudsman hold a level of confidentiality that for any cases that are brought before us. So I will not speak on specific cases before us. But I think for my predecessor, Mr. Gary Walbourne, it was clear that while you may term it political interference or whatever, there was a lack of action on the issue brought forward to the minister. That was clear, and I think even most stakeholders have agreed that that was the case. So while you may not term it political interference, lack of action, I would term also political interference. But certainly in terms of some of the issues brought forward through various articles, if they are true, in terms of interference, possible interference in positions that military members are taking, to me, I think that's very clear that that could be considered political interference. That is the role of the Chief of Defence Staff.
And to follow up on that too, I'm going to kind of double barrel my question here, so bear with me. First, have you ever experienced anything that led you to believe that you or your office would face retaliation under this government for probing or continuing to probe a particular issue? And second, I wonder what you would say to both Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau if they're watching this right now.
Well, certainly me personally, I have not experienced any political interference in the role that I have. In terms of the request of the minister to look at racism, we provided advice on what we could do. He further then asked for a change in that approach. I don't consider that political interference because racism, employment equity, diversity, those are important issues that we were going to look at in any case. So that discussion with the minister, I don't consider that political interference. Some might, I don't. But I feel that it is very likely that given the situation that my predecessor and even predecessors faced, and those are fairly well documented in various cases, and including in our reports to the minister, those cases of either political interference or certainly departmental interference in our operations. I just outlined one a little bit earlier. While it may be considered small, we dealt with it. That is an ongoing situation. In terms of the minister and the Prime Minister, I would say read the report, read the position paper I'm putting forward. This is a part of your solution. This is not the entire solution. This will help you. This will help all Canadians. This will help the members in uniform deal with unfairness. It will allow my office to deal better with unfairness. This can only improve the situation. There's absolutely zero risk in this. The job of an ombudsman is to bring transparency, openness to the people that serve. This is a good thing. Do it. Take action.
Thank you, merci. Prochaine question, next question.
Once again, please press *1 to ask a question. De nouveau, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 pour toute question. The next question is from Christy Kirkup of the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Lick. I wanted to ask you, you were named to the role that you're in now by the Defense Minister, Harjit Sajjan. How rare is it for you to be having a news conference of this kind and coming out and making some commentary about the minister as well as the government more broadly speaking?
Well, certainly the use of a press conference is fully within my authority as outlined in my mandate. I have the authority to speak on any issue. That is the role of an ombudsman, to bring transparency to issues that come to light, that come to the attention of my office. Over the last number of years, my predecessor put forward 2 governance reports, and predecessors before that in this office put a number of reports forward on how we can improve civilian oversight of the military. Very generally, those reports were ignored. Therefore, I found it necessary to bring it to the Canadian people, to bring it more to the attention of those that elect our politicians, and even those politicians that decide upon these issues. That is important. It is also important to make sure that our constituents are aware of the issues that we bring forward. For me, a press conference, while it may be rare, allows me to talk to you, talk to Canadians, talk to politicians, talk to our constituents more directly. This is what is needed. The position that's put forward in the paper today is a solution. It's a part of the solution to help bring fairness for those that serve and for those that are in the military, those that are in the department, the families of those, and even veterans. It is to bring fairness for all. So I will say it again, and I will say it again. Enough is enough. Let's get on with it.
And just as a follow-up today, you've said that the military and the government response to the scandal of sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces has defied common sense, and that there's been zero accountability on behalf of political leadership when complaints are brought forward. Why is this an example of zero accountability on behalf of political leadership?
Well, certainly, I get frustrated, and a lot of people get frustrated when political parties of any stripe do review after review after review after review. I'm frustrated. The people that come to our office are frustrated. They want to see action. They don't want another review. They want to see real action. And what I'm putting forward in the paper today, Mamanda, is a solution to bring real action, to bring real independent external oversight with some teeth to get action from the decision makers. That's what they deserve.
Thank you. Prochaine question. Next question.
Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment. There are no further questions registered at this time. Turning back over to Mr. Bernardo.
Alors, merci tout le monde pour être ici et sur le téléphone. This concludes our press conference. Thank you very much.